We all know that when we cram for an exam or put that last-ditch effort into studying, that the next day we can probably do quite well on that exam. Now, the reasons for this are quite simple. We clog a lot of information into our working memory. We consolidate it overnight and we've got access to that first thing in the morning for a short period of time. But the research since 1939 onwards has espoused a much more holistic way of learning that doesn't involve cramming and then forgetting. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This concept of spaced learning has been around for a while, but in this video, we're going to go a bit further into it to find out some of the nuances of spaced learning. For example, how long should the space be between study periods? How much time should you allocate to it? And even what type of study strategies work the best? So without any further ado, let's have a look. Let's start with the original Penn principles. Penn Principle 4 stated that spacing out practice enhances memory. From a psychological perspective, that means several short sessions of study or practice spread over time improves memory and performance. Educationally, planning study or practice sessions throughout a learning period is way more beneficial than cramming for assessments. And neurologically speaking, the frontal lobe activity increases when study time is distributed across spaced sessions. Let's have a quick look at how that works. So if we're measuring the percentage of information retained over time, then naturally speaking, we go from a great place of memory immediately after learning because it's stuck in our working memory, through to that point way in the future, unfortunately, where our memory of that particular learning fades away to virtually nothing. Now, the percentages here vary depending on the study conducted, but the general rule here is consistent. If we go back and revisit the work in, say, 24 hours, then the curve itself flattens out. The more we do this over some determined planned time, then we find that the curve flattens out to an extent where we can remember a lot more of that original information. Some studies have actually concluded that that retention of information can last a lifetime. The questions we'd like to answer are, is there an ideal duration for spaced practice? Can that duration change over time as competency improves? And are there variations between subjects being studied? For example, if you're studying a more motor-based skill, does the duration between practice actually make a difference, or is it more about the way you practice? Over 80 years of research has demonstrated that spacing out study sessions over a longer period of time improves long-term memory and tested results. So it works. And in other words, if your students have, say, 12 hours to spend on a subject, it's better to study it for 3 hours each week over 4 weeks than to cram all 12 hours into week 4. But can you wait too long? Williams College psychologist Nate Cornell says that at some point, waiting too long between sessions could have a negative effect on learning. But he says, however, most of us space far too little. Practically speaking, in other words, too much spacing is not really a danger anyone should worry about. One possible cause is that over time, people forget what they learned in their initial session. Then, when they come back to the material later, the new study session jogs their memory and they recall what they learned the first time around. That process, forgetting and retrieval, helps cement the new knowledge in place. So should we be looking for short or long spaces? Let's look deep into this so we can correctly advise our students. One study published in 2009 in Applied Cognitive Psychology showed that the spacing effect works on a smaller timescale as well. College students were asked to study a stack of 20 flashcards. The students all studied each word 4 times, but half the students studied the words in one big stack, went through all the 20 words, then started over. But the other half studied the words in 4 smaller stacks of 5 cards each. So the students who used the one big stack had a longer spacing time between each of the 4 times they saw a word. On the test day, the students in the big stack group remembered significantly more of the words than the students in the 4 small stacks group, 49% compared with 36%, suggesting that the longer period of time between revising had a positive impact on retrieval. Dr. Henry Roediger, a psychologist at Washington State University in St. Louis, who has done some key research in the area, says that students might not enjoy taking a quiz at the end of every class or testing themselves every time they finish reading a chapter, but doing so would probably help them remember the material during the final exam and even after the course. He and others have noted that the difficulty surrounding space practice is the likely reason why more students don't do it. It's really up to us, as instructors, to place the value on it and encourage our learners to create a spaced learning plan. So as the studies continue, it's been found that longer periods between revisiting the material is fine for those who already have a high retrieval standard, and shorter periods are best for people who are still having difficulty retrieving key points. Additionally, retrieval practice helps fill in the gaps for those who may already understand the key points. Do retrieval practice periods differ depending on the subject? As a 2013 study found, the retrieval processing during the learning of a new motor task had significant improvement effects. That means recalling the skill shortly after learning it. But the same study found no influence of retrieval practice in skill consolidation, so testing during initial practice promotes rapid and longer-lasting transfer capabilities. So the study of practical skills benefits more from initial testing soon after the skills learned than potentially using these other retrieval practice methods. Can this study apply to the learning of spatial memory maps? Well, the answer is yes. In the short term, it helps with spatial tasks in novel environments. However, over the long term, there was no significant improvement when students were faced with spatial tasks that they needed to reorient themselves for. And while practice obviously does improve the skill over time, this introduces us to the concept of the testing effect. This is when long-term memory is increased when some of the learning period is devoted to retrieving information from memory. It's different from the more general practice effect that is defined as any change or improvement that results from practice or repetition of the tasks or activities. So we have a bit more to cover when it comes to spaced learning and some of the positive things we can do. So what we'll do in the next video is concentrate on 10 learning strategies that can be applied for those spaced retrieval sessions. And we'll talk about how cognitive load plays a role in memory. So until then, thanks for joining me today. Please subscribe to the video series so you can catch up on the principles we've already talked about and the ones that we're producing over the weeks to come. See you soon.